Or Donovan will watch Sullivan for me. Donovan, will you watch Sullivan for me during this? Can you do that for me? Okay, he's gonna watch. Sullivan, you go ahead to the nursery. Donovan's gonna watch you while you're in here.
I'm 11 years old.
There we go. All right. All right, am I rolling back there? Tess? Am I rolling? Good. All right, come on down, gentlemen. Meet with my man tonight. It's good to be with you, fellas. Put my phone on silent here.
When I get bring that phone.
All right, so I'll be turning your Bibles to the book of Proverbs. Proverbs chapter number 23. Proverbs chapter 23. I'm going to read one verse. Stand with me if you would. Proverbs chapter 23. Verse number 22. We're going to read, I'm going to read a couple of verses here, get some context. Proverbs chapter 23, and I'm going to begin reading verse number 22. And the Bible says, hearken unto thy father that begat thee, and despise not thy mother when she is old. Buy the truth, and sell it not. Also wisdom, and instruction, and understanding. It's amazing to me how many times in the Proverbs you find those three. Knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. You always, very rarely do you find a verse in Proverbs that has one of those that you won't find the other one close by within a few verses. Buy the truth, sell it not. Also wisdom, instruction, and understanding. The father of the righteous shall greatly rejoice, and he that begetteth a wise child shall have joy of him. Thy father and thy mother shall be glad, and she that bare thee shall rejoice. My son, give me thine heart, and let thine eyes observe my ways. It's a beautiful verse, and it's a frightening verse all at the same time. Let me read verse 26 again. My son, give me thine heart, and let thine eyes observe my ways. Father, I pray you bless the reading of your word. I pray you use it for your honor and glory. I pray that you would guide me as I speak to our men tonight. Use us for your honor and glory, and I pray these things in thy name. Amen. Thank you. You may be seated. One of the most famous basketball players, and I don't follow basketball at all. Sometimes I've been known to watch the Final Four during March Madness. I didn't get to see it this week, and this month or last month I didn't watch the championship, and I almost wish I had it because it was two fantastic teams, and Kansas won. And I've always been, since my days in Kansas City, I've always been a little bit of a Jayhawk fan. It's one of those things you can't, it's kind of like being in Iowa. You just can't help the Hawkeyes being a thing, you know. And, but I don't follow basketball much. But Charles Barkley, one of the great basketball players, one of the greatest basketball players of all time. I heard him make a statement one time that I thought was one of the greatest things I've ever heard an athlete say. He said, I am not a role model. I'm a basketball player. Dads are role models. And I thought, I think he's on to something. I think he's definitely on to something. Somehow we have attached authority to celebrity. If you're famous, you must know something. I remember hearing the story that Andy Griffith told about when he was still active and he was shooting the Andy Griffith Show when it was still being in production way back when it was on the air and it wasn't in reruns, which was about 100 years ago. And he was at a gathering, and a woman, a fan, walked up and wanted his autograph and all this, and she said, "What do you think the government ought to do about this and this and this and this?" And he said, "Ma'am, I don't know. I'm just an actor." She said, "But you're the sheriff." And somehow that almost seemed to birth something in our country that if someone was a celebrity, all of a sudden they were an authority, that they knew something. And they became, celebrities and athletes, pardon me, celebrities and athletes became the role models. They went from telling us what aftershave to wear and what cars to buy. They evolved from that to telling us how to think and how to vote and what our perception of our philosophy of life should be. I don't care if you hit 200 home runs. I don't care. I met a man at a funeral one time. He was a baseball player. And his name was George Brett. And I got called in because the minister that was doing the funeral for what would have been his grandmother-in-law, she had died, and this hospital chaplain showed up. And he didn't know where he was. He didn't even know there was supposed to be a funeral. He was about 90 years old, and he was senile. I'm not dissing 90-year-old people. My mother's 90, and she is a lot of things, but she ain't senile. She's as sharp as a tack, even at 90 years old. She's still got a real sharp mind. And but I'm standing there next to a man who is playing baseball. He was then in baseball management with the Kansas City Royals. He's wearing a World Series ring on his finger. He holds I don't know if it's a record, but he is in what is called the 2,000 hits club. At 2,000 hits, 2,000 base hits in Major League Baseball. That is nothing small. And the funeral director says, "This is Reverend Cannon. He's ready to step in right now to take care of the service." And I had found out about the service 5 minutes earlier. David Freeman walked in and said, "Can you handle a service if I put you in there right now?" I said, "Preach, pray, or die, man. I'm always ready. I told him I've always got a round in the chamber." That was 20 years ago. And I stepped in and I'm standing next to George Brett, one of the greatest baseball players to ever live. And he's explaining, the funeral director is explaining to the family who I am and what I'm about to do. And George Brett puts his arm around me and says, "So you're my pinch hitter." I said, "I never thought about it that way, but I guess so." He said, and he turns to the director and he says, "You got a deep bench around here." And that was a cool thing. Matter of fact, it was just last year I went home to Kansas City. I went to Kansas City for a funeral. I saw David Freeman. The funeral was at his funeral home, and this was 20 years ago. And I walked in. I said, "Do you remember me?" He said, "I sure do, Reverend. It's good to see you again." And we chatted. And he turns to one of the men that's there. That's a driver, a hearse driver. And he says, I was just telling him, last week, he said, do you remember when I threw you to the wolves with George Brett and his family? I said, man, I tell that story everywhere. Are you kidding? I love that story. At the time of my life, it was a great time. What is the enamorment to these people? Why are we so enamored to the celebrities and that they've accomplished something that few people have accomplished? True. But they haven't accomplished something that somebody down the road won't go further. And for some reason, we think they're the ones that need to be role models. The Bible says, hearken unto thy father that begat thee, and despise not thy mother when she is old. Buy the truth and sell it not. It's interesting that when it's talking about getting truth, wisdom, understanding, and instruction, it's in the context of parents. And he says, my son, give me thine heart, and let thine eyes observe my ways. Now that's a scary verse for me because my ways aren't always good to observe. And I've told my children this straight up. I want my children to know that I'm not perfect. I want my children, and they figured it out quick enough anyway. But give me your heart, observe my ways. Give me thine heart, and let thine eyes observe my ways. And so what in the world does this have to do with the men at Hope Baptist Church? Because it's not just our own children that are observing our ways. There are a lot of children. As a matter of fact, in this church, have you noticed in the service this morning, did you notice how many little boys there are in this church? You notice that? God has given us an abundance of little testosterone machines walking around. We got, Milo's had 3 kids. I've got Katie out here that's got a little boy. We got the Tempers that have a little. We got all these little boys. I've got 3 sons myself. They're older, granted, but I've got 3 sons myself here. We got a lot of young boys in this church. John's got a teenage son that, of course, he's taller than all of us, so he's full grown now. So we've got all of these young men in our church. And I was discussing something with my wife and bringing up the fact that look at how many little boys we have in our church. We live in a culture, men, where male influence is almost, I wouldn't say just non-existent, but it's also opposed. We have a culture. I told the story this morning about the guy with the dog. And the guy saying, don't pet my dog. He doesn't like men. She doesn't like men. Well, you're judging my gender. That's the culture we're in. This world has gone absolutely crazy. That we have men who they're almost ashamed of their manhood. We have school systems who, why is there a major battle going on in Florida? Because they made a law that you can't teach sexuality to 3rd graders and below. What 3rd grader needs to know about sexuality? I mean, they don't need to know that. I mean, when they get older and their body starts changing, I get it. You want to teach them, health, and you want to teach them their body and how their body's developing and everything. I still say that falls to the parents primarily. I still say that should fall to the parents primarily, what they teach their children. And yet this idea, we have feminized our entire culture to the point to where it's starting to backfire on the feminists. Because now we have biological men. Why are we calling them biological men? We have men breaking records in competing in female sports against females. And setting records and breaking records. And the female athletes are told, you say anything about it and we'll kick you off the team. So we have that going on. The Bible has a word for that, by the way. It's called confusion. Look up what the Bible says about sin and confusion. They are given to confusion. They're confused. I'm not confused about my manhood. I'm gonna tell you, I was raised by a man and a woman. Now, I despise the socialist philosophy of it takes a village to raise a child. Number one, that philosophy was proponed by Hillary Clinton, who was an avid left-wing socialist and a crook. Yeah, you ever hear that? Well, what do you get? What do you get when you cross a crooked politician and a dirty lawyer? Chelsea Clinton. Anyway, I'll get that in a minute. But I also don't think we ought to get our philosophy of child rearing from that is an African proverb. And we're going to go to the most backward, uneducated, hedonistic, violent culture on the face of the earth, and we're going to learn. We're going to go to a place where they take little girls and they mutilate their private parts in the name of being sacred, and we're going to get our philosophy from them. That's where we're going to get our child rearing philosophy. No, it doesn't take a village. It takes a mom and a dad. But our culture, we, in a sense, as a church, if it takes a village to raise a child, then let the church be the village. Not that out there. Because their interest in these children is far from my interest in these children. Let it be real men that influence these boys to become men. Let it be men who have a philosophy of responsibility, a philosophy of integrity, a philosophy of manhood, a man who knows what it is to protect and to provide for his family. We also live in a culture where we have millions of children growing up in America in single parent homes. The vast majority of those homes being women, the mother raising the child. My best friend growing up, my dearest friend growing up, Alan Brown, he grew up in a single parent home. He just had his mother. That's all he had. And she knew she couldn't be the manly influence. Now, he had a grandfather that was a great influence on him. His grandfather was a wonderful man. And I knew his grandparents. I knew his mother very well. And now his mother is up in years and she's suffering from dementia. And now Alan and his wife, Michelle, are now taking care of Carolyn, his mother. What gave Alan the integrity to do that was she found men to put in his life to be an influence. She got him into everything. She got him into sports, and she got him into this and that and the other, and got him into martial arts, and he became really good at martial arts. He became really good. As a matter of fact, when he was 13 years old in his division, he was second in the nation in full contact kickboxing. In his division and in his belt class. Brown belt in Aikido, 6-degree blue belt in Taekwondo, tournament fighter, all of that. She put him under the influence of men because she didn't have a man in the home. She did not try to, but she put him under great pastoral leadership. She kept him in church, the churches that had youth pastors and men in that church. And so many times I've seen that. I can name you several great men of God who have pastored, who have been great pastors, great men of God, pastoring great churches that were raised by single mothers or raised by a mother who was married to a worthless drunk. I think about Tom Sexton and Clarence Sexton. Great men, both of them great men of God, pastoring great churches. One's pastoring in Chattanooga, one's pastoring in Powell, Tennessee, doing a great work. Dr. Clarence Sexton is the chancellor of Crown College in Powell, Tennessee. Great Bible college that's training men and women. He pastors this amazing church there. What did she do? She went to the men of the church and she asked that her sons be placed under their leadership. That they would influence their son, that they would influence her sons. Their daddy was a drunk and he was a bartender. He wasn't going to be a good influence on his sons. So she went to the church and found men who would be a good influence on their sons. Today, at Hope Baptist Church, we have a slew of little boys. Strangely enough, the girls in this church are outnumbered. We got a bunch of little boys. I'll tell you what else we've got. We've got a bunch of men of high quality. We've got a bunch of men in this church that know what it is to work for a living. You know what it is to be responsible, to take care of a family, to pay your bills, to be and many of you, you've raised your children, or you've had children under your influence. I think you see where I'm going with this. You see, I believe that if we're going to raise up a generation of men that walk with God, if a generation of men who walk with God are going to be raised up, it's going to be the men in this church that do it. And it's going to be the men in this church that will take to task the boys in this church to be not only the example, but to take them, inject yourself into their lives, win their heart, and let their eyes observe our ways. So what does that look like? Well, it looks like this. Every single man in this church has a talent, an ability, a skill, an experience that would benefit the boys in this church. And it's still honestly on the drawing board. And the reason it's on the drawing board is I want to invite you to the drawing board. I'm not going to I don't have a big plan and a program drawn up. I'm still putting it together. But I want your input. I want your input as to how we, as the men of Hope Baptist Church, can influence the boys I'm going to be putting together a program called Men to Men, Man to Man. And we will occasionally meet like we meet on Sunday nights. And we'll get together. I want you to think of the skills that you bring to the table. There are things that you could teach a young man. There are things that you could teach a boy that would benefit him in the future. To show him real manhood, because he ain't going to see it out there. He's not going to see it on television. He's not going to see it on social media. He's not, all of the debate that goes on social media, I've learned something. There's an old phrase, an adage that I learned in Bible college about the debates that you see on social media. I have friends of mine, Christian zealots, who like to get online and argue with people about theology. I don't like to do that. I don't have time to do that, and it annoys me. I don't like confrontation. I don't like arguing with people about things that they're not going to listen. I remember the statement that I heard a Bible college professor make. He said, these types of debates create more heat than light. And they're not going to learn it there. And many times there's going to be little boys in this church who come from homes where it's just them and mom, and they need manly influence. They need godly men to influence them. And we, as the men of Hope Baptist Church, bring something to the table to influence these boys. And where it starts with you tonight, is in the matter of prayer. Number one, I want you to make it a point to begin to pray for the boys in this church. They are the future of our, every church is one generation away from extinction. Did you know that this chapel has a name? This room, this chapel. Did you know it has a name? Y'all know what the name is? This is Harmony Hills Chapel. Why is it called Harmony Hills Chapel? Because we gave it that name. It's on a plaque back there in honor of the church that was once here, that once preached the gospel, that once did a work for God on this location. A church that sacrificed the handful of members that were left, could have sold this building for $250,000. There was a cash offer on the table. There was another cash offer on the table for $150,000. Why did they go to us for $39,600? Well, number one, that's what they owed on the building. But they could have kept going if they blended with some other group. You know why they went with us? Because in some way they saw us as a Bible preaching church with the gospel. And they didn't want it to become a Jewish community center. They didn't want it to become just another evangelical praise and worship center like you have on every other street corner in this town. But because they're all the same. You've got a coffee house sound stage up there with a praise band getting up with their guitar and their blue jeans, singing 7-11 choruses. Same 7 words 11 times in a row. That's what we call 7-11 choruses. You ever heard that before? Yeah, that's what we call them. Call them 7-11. The same, they didn't want the same little bubblegum church that's out here where people could go in, wave their arms, and go home and with their lives completely unchanged. They wanted a church that actually believed something. And so they deferred to us. And they sold this building to us. God gave us this building. Harmony Hills, let me tell you something about Harmony Hills. Harmony Hills had 128, and I got this from one of the former pastors. That church went from 128 members to 15 members. You know how long that took? 11 years. 11 years and 10 pastors. And they went from 120, almost 130 members to 15. What happened? Where did the next generation go? I don't know all of the factors that played into that. I'm sure there were many. But I can tell you one factor that I know played in, and that was there needed to be a generation of men who said, give me your heart and observe my ways. Take little boys and raise them to be men. My pastor started years and years, decades ago, 30 years ago. My pastor started a soul-winning trainer-trainee program where you get personal evangelism, go out and give them the gospel on the doorstep, teaching them. And then, of course, all these young families in this church. Now, we're talking about a church of at the time, 750 members at the time. Their emphasis was evangelism and discipleship. And that was their evangelism and discipleship, soul winning and training. That was their get them saved, get them baptized, train them so they can go out and get them saved and get them baptized and train them. That was how they built that church. You can't really build a church that way. That's why they dwindled from 750 down to 2,000 in 10 years. Yeah, they've got about 1,700 members now. But they started this program, and they had all these young families with all these little kids. And instead of babysitting the kids, a couple of the young men in the church decided, hey, let's have a program for the kids where we train them and we teach them how to, we disciple them instead of just having a nursery for the kids. Let's disciple them. And they started what they called the Fisherman's Club. And then by the time they got into the teen department, they already knew their Bible well enough, and they could take their Bible out. They had teenagers going into the youth department that could open up the scriptures and give you the gospel and lead you to Christ. Now you want to know how they went from 700 to 2,000? That's how. But what they had was they had a group of men in that church that wanted to be an influence. And I remember Brother Gene, I can't remember his last name. He started this program for these boys. And he taught them Christian character. That's what he called it, a Christian character. He taught them how to say please and thank you. And he taught them how to say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am. And he taught them how to read the Bible. And he taught them how to work. And he taught them how to, and the men that were working with him in that program taught them how to be men. God has given us an opportunity, and an opportunity is an obligation that's been flipped on its head. I'm just telling you. If there's an opportunity, there's an obligation when it comes to serving God. And God has given us an opportunity here, and in so doing, I want to be a good steward of that. I want to be an influence on these boys. And I want you to begin even this week doing 3 things. Number 1, I want you to begin to pray for the boys in this church. Pray for the children's ministries in this church. Number 1. Number 2, I want what to pray. I want you to pray that I want you to pray a hedge around them. I want you to pray for their protection. I want you to pray for those who would influence them, that God would protect them from bad influences. And then I want you to begin to ponder in your own mind how you can be an influence on these children. Every single one of you have something to bring to the table. And if I had the rest of the men in this church, I could say the same thing to them. We've got some folks that are out tonight, and I understand that. But to be an influence on them. Some little boys will never know how to bait a hook unless one of us show them. Some little boys will never learn how to take a pencil and I can take my boys and I can take a pencil and a square and I can teach them how to cut a straight line. See, it's not about imparting wisdom on them. It's about imparting your presence. It is, as we say in the chaplaincy, a ministry of presence. It's being there and being you and bringing what you bring to the table. Some of you can teach my boys things that I'm not good at. And every single one of us have that ability and that talent to bring to bear on these boys, to bring to these boys and bring something into their lives to be an influence on them. And I want you to begin to pray about about the development of a man-to-man program with these boys. Say, what is that going to look like? In its fruition, I don't fully know. But it's a burden on my heart, and it's a vision in my mind that I want to create something where our men actively influence our boys. Number one, pray for those boys. Number two, begin in your mind to formulate how you might be an influence. What do you bring to the table? What skill? What talent? What knowledge? What wisdom do you have? I mean, it says here, buy truth and sell it not. What truth do you have to sell, gentlemen? What wisdom, what instruction do you have to impart? And all of you have something. You know, it'd do real good for some boys to just be around some men that work. You know, I've seen these little bitty kids. I've seen my son is married to my son Jesse is married to an angel. We adore his wife, and but her sister and brother-in-law, Joette's sister, is married to a farmer in North Dakota. And I see the pictures on Facebook. They've got a little boy, and he's adorable. And I see him take, he gets to go out with Daddy today and bale hay. Gets to go bale hay. And he loves it just because he loves doing it because he's out there with Dad. They love it. They love being out there with Dad. I'm going to be out there with Dad. And the truth of the matter is, with Dad, it's just a chore. But it's different when he's imparting that on his son. He's teaching his son how to take care of animals. He's teaching his son how animal husbandry. And he's teaching him farming. He's teaching him how to, let's go out and ride with Daddy on the tractor. He's not just riding with Daddy on the tractor. He's learning how to drive a tractor. Now, he's doing that when he's 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. He's out there with Daddy riding on the tractor. There's going to be a day when he's going to want to drive the tractor. And Daddy will teach him to drive the tractor. Then there's going to be a day when it's his tractor. And that's the day that everything that Dad has instilled in him will all come to fruit. Because then it will be him bringing in the harvest. I think they're raising their son right in that regard. More and more as our church grows, you will see young men, and it's true about little girls too, but you'll see young men come into this church, little boys come into this church that don't have the male influence that they need. You can be that influence. Number one, begin to pray. Number two, begin to formulate that thing which you can do. And number three, begin to think of how you can help me develop this as an organized program. Begin to put your ideas on paper and bring them to me. Be involved in this. Determine that you have what it takes to influence others. You want to talk about changing lives? You want to talk about being an influence? The truth of the matter is, and in the world, if you know anything about basketball, Charles Barkley is a household name. Michael Jordan is a household name. But what did he do to change a life? How many lives did he build? I ran into a woman who bore a striking resemblance to a famous actress. Famous actress. And I asked her straight out, I said, has anybody ever told you you look like? And she looked like, I don't know if you know the actress, and I know her, so we can all confess our sin. I know who she is. And not that I've ever really been a fan, but she looked like Jennifer Aniston. Striking resemblance to Jennifer Aniston. And I asked her, she said, well, I might have had one or two people say that. She was very humble about it. It's a very lovely lady, obviously. And she said, I wish I had her money. And I thought, no, you have something she doesn't have. She had just been on the phone with her daughter. I heard her talk and had this sweet conversation with her daughter. I saw a wedding band. I mean, she had rock on. She had a serious rock right here. And obviously married. She has a happy marriage. She has a great relationship with her children. And that's something that Jennifer Aniston never had. And probably never will. You know, you're not fortunate because you look like Jennifer Aniston. Jennifer Aniston is fortunate because she looks like you. And this woman had children that she had. This woman had a career. This woman had a marriage. This woman had the life. That the truth is, most Hollywooders will never enjoy. They got the fame, they got the fortune. We're going to look at their movies and we're going to be sad when they die, but they're not going to build lives. This is life-changing. This is influence. The internet has people out there that just because of their opinion is listened to by a lot of people. They're called influencers. I don't know how you get to be an influencer. But what I'm interested in is being an influencer in the lives of the boys and men in this church. And by the way, investing yourself in these boys is not going to hurt you either. You will learn things too. You will benefit from it. You will grow from it. You grow in what you know when you teach what you know. I can know something and not grow. I really grow when I teach it. Told somebody, I said, I had a Sunday school teacher make a comment one time about how much they have learned the Bible while being a Sunday school teacher. I said, yeah, you always learn more when you teach it than when you just study it. You always learn a subject better when you teach it. I want you to begin to pray and begin to get a vision for this and for these boys. How can I be an influence on them? How can I get them to give me thine heart and let thine eyes observe my ways? Let's all stand.